There's a couple reasons why I wanted to do this lecture and talk about this. Like I said, this was something that I was adapting for the digital narrative illustration class, but we sort of ran out of assignments. That class was a huge success over this last semester, and I really want to continue forward. And there's a couple reasons why I really wanted to talk about Star Wars. Number one, Star Wars is really the birth of foundational concept art. It's some of the most early concept art that we've had, and all of this came from my era when I was a kid, when I was growing up, even though I didn't know about when it was 1977, I was 7 years old when Star Wars was first released. And even though I didn't get to see the concept art, I got to see all the toys. And part of the Star Wars trilogy and all the episodes have changed the way that movies are made. It's changed the way that that toys are made. It's adjusted and modified merchandising. It's had a drastic effect upon everything. So what I'm going to do is I actually wrote down the next 3 slides after this are what I call the Star Wars recipe. Okay, because anything that you learn from the Star Wars artists and the way that they composed compositions and the way that they were painting, even though they weren't doing digital yet, we will see some digital later today, but they were doing, most of this work was done, but the piece you're looking at right now is from an artist named Ralph McQuarrie, and Ralph was responsible, he's one of the lead designers. He's old guy now in a sense and past, but it's just the fact that we get to look, and these were all traditional illustrations. So the great thing, why this is so important, is not only are we talking about composition, narrative storytelling, and other aspects of design, but if you take anything from the Star Wars art, take what you learn from them in terms of composition and simplicity, and if you apply that into your own art and storyboarding, I guarantee you will be a huge success. In fact, just curious, has Brian Murray talked about this at all in his class in terms of composing, staging? Maybe not in terms of, and Brian Murray just finished working on a Star Wars movie, and he was, worked on the whole Kessler sequence, right, in the last movie, but there's something that's happening in terms of the way that they're composing. It's a simplicity, okay? And you could I have friends that literally, if you were to ask them, how did you become a storyboard artist and how did you do really good, or how did you become really good as a concept artist, they will tell you, I looked and copied the formula of Star Wars. And that's what we're going to talk about today, okay? So let me skip the next 3 slides really quickly. 1, 2, 3, and we'll come right back to those in a minute. Let's just take a look at some of the art really quick. Okay, so the reason why I wanted to skip those slides, I'm going to come back to them, is I wanted you guys to verbally tell me what you start to notice in terms of shape arrangement, in terms of grouping, in terms of visual reads. So when I look at Star Wars artwork, I sort of break it down into 2 different fundamental areas. They have really great compositional reads, and they have really great narrative reads. I think if you keep it very simple in those 2 categories, it will be a lot easier for you to figure out what they're doing. And the goal after this lecture is for you guys to try to apply this on your own, work on some of your own sketches and thumbnails, and we actually will also talk about subject matter today as we're going through things, because there are certain types of scenes and emotional context that you're seeing being used here that you're going to see only in Star Wars that you're not going to see from other artists. Okay? All right, so let me just start flipping through. Okay? Oops. Whoa, I'm not used to this. Let me back up there. Okay, that's our first shot. Let's go to the second shot here. So this is all Ralph McQuarrie, early work and concept that he did. I mean, imagine coming up with this when nothing was done. I mean, he was really pretty much the forefather for, illustration and concept art and trying to figure out how things would come together. And his art wasn't just, it's not just digital art, or compositional art. He's defining props in there. In fact, a lot of the props that he drew inside his art ended up defining the whole toy design market. So some of that is happening as well. If you think about that, it's not just about drawing pretty illustrations in color, but he's also having to go through and sort of encapsulate and bring forth different types of design that are going to support the consumer, product market. Now, in the beginning, who knows a little bit of history about Star Wars when it was first pitched? It wasn't going to be successful. In fact, okay, they had pitched it, okay, to numerous people, and studios were shutting it down. Nobody wanted anything to do with it, okay? Finally, they were able to get enough interest into it, and then, does everyone know whose idea it was and who was pitching it? Just making sure. Okay. Someone's going to say Spielberg. No, it was Lucas, right? And as Lucas was going through, and, you know, he had this idea, which if you think about what Star Wars is, it's really a Knight's Tale set in the future. So it's the same story, and we talk about this also with composition structure. It's the same exact story that was taking place with, like, Knights of the Round Table, but instead it was just futuristic, and you would put characters into the future and get to show the audience something that they never had. But George's one idea that he had that he wanted to do, and if you listen to some of the interviews that are on YouTube, and this is where he was brilliant, is that he wrote in all the rights for the toys. All go to him. And at that time, all these other companies were going to invest money into his first production. They didn't care about that. They said, this thing's going to be a flop. Who even cares? But when you're looking at this, I grew up with the action figures. I grew up with that TIE fighter. In fact, I had both of those. Okay, and so that had a huge impact. They even had this as a toy that was available. Okay, so there's this immediate transition that had never happened before between the importance of prop design and concept art that was now going to support all the toy design aspects. Okay, so as we go through part of the first rendition here, this actually was from the second, but it was still artwork done from Ralph. Okay. What are the couple of the things that you're noticing? Anyone in terms of composition?
Scale.
Yes, scale is huge. In fact, I'm going to sum it up for you right now. There's always large, medium, small. Every single piece, there is always a simplicity of large, medium, and small. Okay, so the secret about Star Wars is knowing how to rotate that out, because these are the different items that you can have to plug in if you look at it on a scale. You have the environment. You have either a person or a prop, and those of you that don't know what a prop is, it's a vehicle, or it's anything touched or used by a human hand. Okay, so you have the environment and you have the prop, okay, or a person. And so you have three main things taking place all the time, and there's usually some form of an action, okay, that's taking place. So you have three things that are always happening, and then you have large, medium, and small. That's actually the whole entire recipe. So let me scoot back here, let me go back a couple frames. We'll go back to the very beginning, okay? All right, we'll talk about that in a minute here. So compositional layout. There's always foreground, midground, and background, okay, with large, medium, small. And those of you that have had me in environment design, the first things we talk about, introduce, is understanding perspective depth, what we call the Z depth in space, which is overlap of foreground, midground, and background. So they always have that pretty much taking place, and they always have large, medium, small. Now, on the narrative side, remember we said there's always three items that take place. There's always a main character or vehicle, there's always part of the environment itself, and then there's a prop, or there's another part of a main environment that's involved there, okay? And then one of the secrets, though, about the narrative layout is understanding what the action and the theme is. And that's actually it's pretty easy to think about, because what's going to happen when you have an establishing shot on a location? A one-point perspective, or 90% of all establishing shots, okay? So your horizon line is going left or right, and it's very simple and it's very easy. What happens if you're going to be in a fight sequence? You could be in 2-point, or you're going to have angles that are tilted, right? So we'll come back to this slide a little bit later. I wanted to copy and paste this, but we can always sort of zoom back to it. So let me jump back over here and let's take a look. So what do we have here? Here's an establishing shot showing characters and location. The majority of the time, that's going to be a low-level horizon line, 1-point perspective drawing. Okay, all right. Now right here we have. This is perspective talk. Those of you who haven't had the perspective class, I teach it next term. Okay, these are some of the things we talk about, how perspective affects the way that we tell stories. Okay, whenever we have transition, whenever we have objects going from place A to place B, so if someone's going to fight somebody, if someone's on their way to land a ship, if someone's going to go into a planet, if somebody's on a vacation and they're driving a car, we're always going to see that in 2-point perspective. It's a transitional shot. It's a more comfortable shot, and it makes sense. That's a great example of that. Okay, let's come over here. So here we have a fight scene that's happening. So what are our angles in our fight scene? It's a term called a Dutch tilt. So we have things now tilted at offset angles. So anytime we have action, anytime we have people fighting each other, it doesn't matter if they're using lightsabers, it doesn't matter if they're standing on ships, it doesn't matter what they're doing. Anytime there's any type of a fight scene, there's going to be what we call counter angles and slanted angles. Okay, so inside staging, a Dutch tilt was, it actually, that expression came from the Dutch immigrants that would come here and they would get off the boat, and once they got off the boat, they would be walking like this at an angle with a little bit of a tilt because they've been rocking on the seas for so long. So that became known as like a Dutch tilt. And so a Dutch tilt in film means when you take something that's at a 90-degree angle and you tilt it either to the left or to the right, about anywhere from 20 to 40 degrees, and it implies a sense of action that's going to take place. Okay? All right. And then here, again, this is sort of like this is an informational shot with people talking. Whenever we have informational shots, it's always going to be set up in 1-point perspective. It's just really simple. It's easy that way. Whenever we have a group of people sitting around like a Pentagon table talking about a possible war, it's going to be in 1 point. Anytime we look at the Knights of the Round Table, it's all set up exactly in 1-point perspective. Anytime you see the United States president sitting on the screen, it's in 1-point perspective. Anytime you see the inside of like the CIA office, it's in 1 point. So it's the same thing's going to apply here. It's just really simple staging techniques. Okay, all right, let me go back, and I want to quote this slide right here. Okay, this is from Doug Chang. Do you know who Doug Chang is? He's one of the early, he's the primary, secondary concept artist that came in to work on the last grouping of the Star Wars movies, and he studied a lot with Ralph McQuarrie. He also then became the creative art director at ILM, which is Industrial Light and Magic up north, which is, if you don't know, that's George Lucas's company. So what happened after Lucas made Star Wars is he made what was called the Ranch, which was up north in Marin County, okay, in Northern California, and that became a really defined area for them to work on other movies. So they thought, why not take all the knowledge we have in terms of story, composition, art. They had a full-fledged art department. They have a CG department. They put all of that together and made the ILM Ranch. So that's actually a place where a lot of you could look into because they actually still have an art department and they have a CG department and they still make movies for other companies and other people. So I found this really great interview with Doug Chang. And he was talking about the troubles that he had as a young artist having to work for Lucas. And he was sort of, coming here from another country, and I think he came over here from England, but part of his background was from Taiwan. And he had just gotten out of school, and he started working for Lucas immediately, and he was trying to figure out exactly what Lucas wanted while talking with Ralph McQuarrie. And these were some of the things that he commented on one of his interviews. And I took these literally out. He said all of these words in a 45-second spot. I could find it and play it for you. It's actually on YouTube. He actually said this when he was talking about the Star Wars recipe or the way that they would design. He said, less is always more. And that's something that a lot of art students don't understand. Does anyone know why they don't understand it? Marshall talks about this in composition structure too. Because as a young student, you feel if you add more detail, you're going to make the piece better, and it actually doesn't work that way. So the less amount of information that you have actually strengthens part of the composition. Okay, another thing that he talked about was frequency of detail. So if you think about that and you think of radio frequencies and detail, meaning that detail isn't everywhere, it's going to be in little parts. It's going to be like in a bandwidth or like and then he talked about a rhythm of proportions. Okay, going from large to small. Think of an algorithm moving around and going up and down. Nothing should be constant and steady. Things should be changing constantly. Okay, another thing he mentioned was positive and negative shapes always being used, which is about just basic reads and shape language. Okay, another thing he talked about really quickly was contrast. How important contrast was that a lot of times it wasn't about light and rendering, but it was just about having a dark against a light set up in terms of visual reads to get the artist or the eye of the viewer to look at the artist's work to get a quick visual indication of what's happening. He talked about bands of low detail and bands of high detail. Again, that's another way of thinking about balance and thinking about arranging your art. You can't have a detail everywhere in one area, but what you can have, we talk about this a little bit differently, is we talk about having an area of detail with an area of rest. And then having maybe another area of detail, but it's a little bit smaller. It's not the same size to compete against what you just had. So that would be the bands of low detail versus high detail. So if you keep all these things in mind and you go into this recipe, you just always have to think of things as large, medium, small, and you have to just think about there's always just going to be 3 simple parts to the narrative. It's that easy. Okay? The one thing you do have to think about, some of you that haven't had me or that haven't thought about this, is you have to think about the perspective of a particular scene. Okay, when do we use establishing shots, transitional shots, a chase scene, a fight scene, attack scene? By the way, don't worry about that. Pretty much all chase scenes, fight scenes, attack scenes are going to be set at one point perspective, and then they will usually go into a Dutch tilt. Okay, love scenes can start in one point. They might transition into 2. A planning scene, what I mean by planning is when you have a group of people that are all sitting together around a table and they're planning an attack on somebody, which is another common theme that they have. One thing you'll also notice in Star Wars movies is whenever it's the good guys, they tend to be sitting down or sitting around an area. Whenever it's the bad guys, they're always standing on a bridge, and then they're planning an attack on somebody. Okay, those are huge structure moments, because now when you go back and look at the art, it all starts to make sense. The largest thing that you have in here is the environment right now. So the large, medium, small. Large is the environment, medium is the rock here in the foreground, and then small would be the characters. Okay, and that's what part of the recipe is. Here, now it's shifted a little bit, even though someone could probably argue and go, well, technically, Phil, the background or the environment is the larger part of the composition. Technically, the giant ship in the front is. Okay, so if you think about that, all you have to do is put one giant ship in the front, and then he has another ship turning to the side, and then he has a bunch of smaller ships in the back. That's it. That's the whole narrative and structure right there. It's back to the simple use of 3s, which, I don't want to get too much into this, but if you look at what the historical background and reference of prime numbers is in terms of design, it's extremely important. So we tend to have things set up in 1s, 3s, 5s, and 7s. It reads better. Composition across multiple nationalities in different types of religions, especially different types of languages, are also set up with prime numbers as well. Okay, so as we continue to go forward, I'm going to stop talking as much and try to flip through some of this art now, because there's just a tremendous amount of art. So look at large, medium, and small. What's large in this? It's the very background behind us, right? Okay, medium is the starfighter in front of us, the X-Wing fighter, and then in the back we have the small would be technically this guy right here. Okay, what's the official name for just the TIE fighters? Yeah, what was Darth Vader's TIE fighter's name? There's a specific name. I used to have one of those books, and it was all the props of Star Wars, and it had everything labeled. There's a whole language and classification for everything, which is pretty fascinating. Okay, so there's another planning effort. There's original art there, and again, if you look at the large, medium, and small, the large would be, to me, it's all the people in the room. Okay, the medium would be part of this console that's right here separating, and then the small would be the characters that are sort of right up in the front. Okay, so again, large, medium, and small. The environment is pretty large. You have this is your next largest shape here, and then here's the small characters. So there's always that sensibility of scale. So just this recipe in itself, if you start sketching and creating a series of drawings, and you start thinking about everything as large, medium, and small, that's it. There's no adding in extra information or detail. You have to keep it super simple. So what's large? Right now in this, the large is the whole environment. Okay, now technically somebody might argue and go, well, technically, this is pretty large itself. Well, what about the rest of the environment? It takes up most of the composition. That's large. This is medium, and then the ships are the small detail. Okay, that's it. So if you follow that, large, medium, small, it actually is a way for you to start adjusting scale. Anytime you see anything of importance, we talk about this in perspective when we look at 1-point perspective. Anytime you see the front of a church, anytime you see the front of a very significant building, there's something that's really important that has a lot of weight and power. It's always going to be set up in 1 point. And by the way, that's across all faiths. It doesn't matter if you're Catholic, Christian, Buddhist, if you're in a Mongolian temple, if you're in an Arab mosque. If you look at all of those different items and backgrounds, it all sets up and follows the same way. It's all centered around 1-point perspective with a dedicated center line in the middle. So if, by the way, this was from Empire, but this was just a nice little simple shot. It was good to look at. There's another example of large, medium, small, right? Look at the huge planet in the back, little side planet here, 3 simple reads. Okay, so if you'd like, what you can do is you can start working on some thumbnails this week, and then next week we can take a look at them. I'll do a demo this week, and I do have a blog site for us set up. It's FC Winter Session, and what I was going to ask you, if you want, I can put all these images up that I have, so you can look at these again when you go home. And I'm also recording this lecture so I can give it to those of you that might have brought a thumb drive. Okay, so as we start moving through, can you see the importance of what Ralph McQuarrie did and how he sort of changed the world in terms of he was combining illustration techniques in together, bringing them to tell stories, and that right there is just worth its weight in gold. There's so much to learn from that. So what would the large in this be? Part of the large is the background of the environment itself. Medium in here might even be the characters themselves all stacked together, and then your small might be the shape right here that leads into the foreground. Okay, so again, here's another example. Large would be the whole environment itself. It depends how you look at your grouping sometimes with Star Wars, but it starts to make sense after a while that if the whole environment would be large, then the medium would be this giant shape up here, which would, does anyone remember the name of that? So that's right. Okay. There was another formal name too with numbers, and then you have the small, which up here would be the character relationships. Okay, in the foreground. So there's always foreground, midground, background. Okay, always large, medium, small. Okay, part of the oops, I hit my mouse by accident. So part of the large again is the environment. So you start to notice this trend where most of the time the really large part is just all the environments. Okay. And so if you think about that and take that out of the picture, that means all you have to do is design the medium and the small, which would be the characters, and then some type of either a city or a prop or something that they deal with, and then the background just fits into itself. Okay? It's pretty cool, though, when you look at all this stuff. That's great. So obviously there, it's so funny because sometimes you don't even see the secondary ship here, but the background here has become that that large destroyer, and then you have the ship right here, large, medium, and again small. So that's that feeling of scale that's really transitioning. So even when we moved over into Empire Strikes Back, the one thing that changed, I think, with Empire Strikes Back is Ralph McQuarrie was working on that. But now what they started to do is they started giving him like a series of shots that were telling the movie as what we would call sequential storyboards. So there were sequential illustrations that were coming together that you could follow one after another, and they were meant to give you the whole entire feel of the location. So, and it's also a form of what we call color scripting. So now you start looking and going through all this, and you start seeing how the environments are changing based on colors, and how they're also going through that narrative storytelling process. Okay? So as you start going through here, you're going to really start to see, I mean, there's always a place for argument where you go, well, technically, the environment was large, or you could even say that the Falcon right here, the Millennial Falcon, it's large, and then this could be the medium grouping, and then the people would be the small grouping. That's fine. There's also overlap and depth here, but they're pretty much when you look at all the art, they're constantly focusing on the same transition every single time. And what was cool about this, you can really tell, can you see the difference in the art that Ralph was doing? How it's becoming much more story driven. The characters are not all at 90-degree angles anymore. They're sort of involved. That would be really cool to see what that art direction meeting must have been like way back in the day. I think if I was 7 when the first one came out, I think I was like 11 or 12 when Empire Strikes Back came out. Okay? Which is pretty cool. So you're also going to notice a huge change in angles with the way they were illustrating. You're going to have up shots, down shots. So technically, this is a 3-point up shot looking up, but it made sense for part of the story. But still, even on an up shot or even on a down shot, you're going to have large, medium, and small. It's always going to stay that way. You just have to think about how you're going to structure it and what part of your narrative and your storytelling element's going to be. Okay? I mean, look at that. That to me, that's just right there. It's one of my favorite pieces. That's just the simplicity of good composition right there. You know? Now, the large, you could battle between, I know there's the environment in there, but look at the scale of that walker all the way in the back. So the character is actually one of the larger items that you see right in the foreground. And then medium, you have sort of the ship behind them. But even if you didn't attack it that way, you could still put it into groupings. And the large, medium, and small still works in terms of all the grouping efforts as well. Okay? So again, we're back down to just simple threes. If you keep things in threes and stay very simple with what you're doing, the outcome tends to be 10 times more stronger with a better understanding of what's taking place. So every time we look at a slide as we go through this, there's only, you should always be asking yourself large, medium, and small, and just getting that down under your brain. I'm going to start to go through some of these a little bit quicker because we're only at 33 and I have 121 slides of artwork. Okay, that's how much artwork there is, and that's how much of a change has happened over the years. But the other thing that I noticed is I liked the way they were framing in these wide panoramic compositions, and then sometimes they would go back to these sort of like squared off TV frames. And part of this, if you're wondering why that's happening, because back in this day that was the size of TV format. So that was the thought, that's movie format. Screens were like this too when I was a kid. Large, medium, small, right? Look at that, isn't that beautiful? Large, medium, small. So there's that, what Doug Chang mentioned after working with Ralph, being sort of stuck in the middle and working with Lucas and going over everything. There is a general theme that's constantly that's working, and you can't drift from that theme. I mean, look, you can even change pictures and you still have the same theme always happening. It could be different ships, it could be different people. It's always large, medium, and small. And that might be really difficult for a lot of you to understand over time, because Marshall talks about this quite a bit, the natural things, the natural tendency of students is to complicate their drawings and their compositions and their paintings. It's to add too much detail where it's not needed. I like our sound effect of the truck backing up. It's pretty cool, right? All this original work from Empire. Okay, then, so things sort of changed a little bit, and this is when Doug Chang was brought into the picture. It was still large, medium, and small. There are different pros, and I remember, actually, I was working, and I was at a studio when this was being released, because I remember getting the Art of book, and we were running around with this book, all looking at it. What was funny about that is I was working with a guy that was a good friend with Frank, and his name was Ray Leung. And I remember Ray and I getting this book and looking into it. So there are different pros and cons. Some people liked Doug Chang, some people didn't. In my opinion, I think Doug Chang stayed with that recipe and formula, and he kept that together, and he was able to still keep large, medium, and small shapes together. I thought he was a brilliant composer. And there's something else that Doug Chang did. He totally modified the way that we work with markers. He brought out and showed everybody how you can use, I'll show you that in a minute here, but he showed everybody how you could use markers at that time from a production standpoint. What I mean by that was going to say production design. So there were people working in furniture design and consumer products. They were designing and drawing like watches and, futuristic briefcases and anything consumer product related, and they would use markers. And he brought some of those markers into sketching and comping out vehicles and human beings and robots and other really cool props. Okay, but his illustration work was fantastic. Again, it was just really simple. So what you're starting to see, one of the changes that happened between Empire Strikes Back and then into Return of the Jedi with Ralph again, and then into Phantom Menace, I couldn't put all the images up, so I had to skip a couple movies here and there, is that now the concept art is becoming cinematic portrayal for the movie. Does it make sense? This exact shot was inside the movie where the ship had landed and Darth Maul was walking, and they show this exact shot. So the concept artist now, you're actually setting up not just ideas on what a scene is going to look like, but you're also creating a cinematic layout that is going to influence the shots inside the movie. So once again, that comes back to staging. Look at the difference on, is that 1 point or 2 point perspective? It's obviously it's 2 point. Look at how it's set up. But then again, if you go back, that's in a 1 point. It's a battle scene. You come back over here and you look at this. Does anyone remember this sequence? This is in 2 point perspective. It could be argued it's in 1 point, but it's 1 point shifted. That ship is in 2 point. And what is Darth Maul doing here? He's in transition. He's landed and he's going to go from point A to point B. He's going to get out of the ship and he's going to go out and he's going to go look to kill somebody. And that's part of that transition. That's why it's a 2 point shot. So there are certain guidelines that are always being followed, and you don't deviate from those. Okay. Another great piece here. So look at the large, medium, and small. Look at the environment. So you literally have, if you plan it right and think about it, also in terms of the subject matter, this is literally just two characters standing on top of a ship that flies with a tree behind them, and then a really large environment dropped right behind them. It's nothing more than that. It's simplified. Okay, so notice the tilt in there. What does that mean? It means something's going to happen, right? This is part of that opening scene to these characters coming up to battle in their lineup. One in the foreground, the rest in the background. Remember, they're coming over the hill. Okay, so that angle in there, that Dutch tilt, it means something very specific. Then look at that great angle shot. And one of my favorite parts, it's just the little minute details, was when this battle was going on, was when that ship hit the ground right there and the tail of it just dug up the ground. It didn't have to happen. They could have just had it hovering. But it just was a nice way to have a nice series of counter angles in there where you have the ground in an angle, you have these cool counter angles of the lasers coming, and then you have the ship at an angle. Everything's off kiltered. Something, someone's about to die or get killed. You have this big ship chasing after you, shooting off lasers. And then you get to something like this, and again, it's a level of importance. We're back to large, medium, and small. We're back to 1 point perspective shot. Okay, so this right here was the type of comping that changed everything. Nobody had really seen this too much before besides being used in just standard product design. But, there's a difference between sketching Walkman and shoes, and then all of a sudden you're seeing ships and vehicles being done. Okay, but it's a really fantastic way to draw, and it was really simple and easy. What was really cool is there's actually a demo of Doug Chain where he's doing this interview, and he's actually drawing on his iPad Pro. He went back and he did the same drawing he did of one of the robotic army guys here, and he drew them out of memory. And it was a drawing that he had done 25 years ago where he was still using. So actually there's been that much time period that's taken place. Okay. All right. So, of course, let's jump ahead. Now let's go take a look at Rogue One. And let's look at some of the artwork that's coming out. So things, on this, by the way, I put Doug Chain because Doug Chain was the lead art director. However, he did not do a majority of the art. The majority of the art, to give credit, was being done by another super talented guy named Ryan Church, who was another guy from Art Center, who could really paint very well. But one of the really cool things about Ryan Church, because I had saw this in some early demos that I have of Ryan Church doing digital painting, is he'd already been taught the simplicity of staging and compositional layout at Art Center, because everything that they teach over there is about just, again, the simple, quick 1, 2, 3 visual reads, large, medium, and small. You don't have to overcomplicate anything. Okay, and he's just a wonderful designer. He knows a lot about shape language. He understands a lot about scale and reference and visual reads. I mean, this is a great example of how to do a vehicle. This, by the way, was from Tom Tenery, and I think he worked part in this with another guy. There's another guy named Patrick Klein. So Tom Tenery used to be the lead for the Art Center College of Design Entertainment program. Okay. But look at, here you see the prop is just a shape. You see the scale. You see it turn at a different angle. And then you see it at another side angle here, a little bit larger with detail in it. It's just a beautiful portfolio page. Okay, so what you're seeing here, that was from Doug Chang right there. So you're seeing a lot of emphasis, a lot of change happening in the way that we view characters and props, the way the design sensibilities are happening. And that also influenced into the way the art direction was taking place on part of Rogue One as well. So we're back to large, medium, and small again, okay? But at the same time, it's sort of, you can see part of the painting styles that have adapted because everything's gone digital now. And so people aren't working in, paints and in Prismacolor pencil and doing a ton of rendering. Everything's gone digital. Not only digital, but another part of digital that we have that we're going to see here in a little bit later from the last movie would be the term kit bashing, where we start taking realistic photos and we start blending them together. But again, back to the recipe is still the same. It's still large, medium, and small. And all of that is going to hang together in part of the actions. That's a great shot there. Look at the blur in the background. You have those ships just speeding by after doing a run. Really like the design sensibilities they placed on these in terms of the angular designs. Really quick, simple, easy reads. The locations are great. They feel evil. There's a lot happening. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Look at large, medium, small. Look at foreground, midground, and background. And then look at the large, what would you guys say the large shape is in there? It's actually it's the ground. It's from the foreground all the way up here is probably the larger, most dominant shape. The environment is just a really simple sky. There's not even much back there. It's just like a series of really loose clouds. So the largest shape in here is probably this shape that goes from here and all the way down. And then this would be the medium shape right up there. And then you'd have the small right here. Okay. Did everyone in here like Rogue One? Yeah, it's great. It's nicely done. I mean, there's a lot to say about some of the other. I'm a little iffy on this piece right here. Because when I saw this, and I'm not knocking Ryan Church, who's an amazing artist, but it was really, really busy. And I wonder if they did this under panic of submitting work, because some of it feels like it was like montage really quick and sort of thrown in there. But it was supposed to be a massive battle scene. And you still have large, medium, and small happening in there, but then there's a lot of small in there taking place. But what really inspired me was looking at this concept art was how some of it was really loose, and also the simplicity of light and values. There's not, if you go back and look at the light and the rendering, there's not a lot of rendering in there. A lot of it's just local color, and all they do is they take like one side of the painting and then they darken it and they create a shadow side. So if you look right here, all they did was they came in here and they threw just a dark layer on there. They created a shadow side. Then it just indicates, okay, yeah, if there's a shadow there, light's coming here, it hits a little bit on the helmet. That's it. Pretty much everything else on this character, everything down here, it's all pretty much just local color. So that's another thing if you go back and look at all this work. So what I've done before is I'm going back, taking a look at all these illustrations and all this artwork, and I realized a lot of it, there's not like an overabundance of lighting being done. It's really simplistic lighting. There's not too much rendering. It's just simple light versus dark side. And if you look at that, I mean, light versus dark side, that's even same back down to the whole compositional layout of what the theme of the movie is too. I found that one was a little over. Actually, that was done for a video game. I should have taken that image out. This was all So now here we're starting to see some photo bash coming in. The realistic rock textures up here being followed through. But again, look at the scale difference of large, medium, and small. I have a friend of mine. I'm not going to say what his name is, in case he sees this. But he works at DreamWorks right now. He's in visual development. Okay, and I remember back in the day when he was first learning color and building a visual development portfolio, he told me his whole goal. He goes, all I'm going to do is copy the Star Wars recipe, and I'm going to put it all into animation. Everything's going to be large, medium, and small, and the scale's always going to be a massive change from super big to super small, and that has a visual impact upon the audience and the people that are looking at your artwork. Here's a great example of that. Okay, so now we get into the art of Last Jedi with Seth Engstrom, another super talented artist. A lot of things still happening in terms of large, medium, and small. Okay, however, I don't know if it's really hard to see right here, but you can see you have the large, the rocks. You could even look at the characters as medium and then small back here. You have the Falcon, Millennial Falcons, sort of fading off in the back there. However, though, I wonder if during this production they wanted a huge amount of texture and photo bash, because there's a lot inside this work here. Lots of angular work, lots of counter angles, okay? Really nicely done, though. And the fact that this was, again, here we are, what do we see? Over a transition of 10 years, you're starting to see the concept art now again supporting the framework of the film itself. So it's not, a lot of times when people do concept art, especially like in animation, you're creating artwork that's like blue sky. It's just there is what we call blue sky visual development work to support an idea. This is, again, changing where they actually took this, put this inside the movie based off of the frame shot itself. So the importance of that is you, as the young designer who is coming up with all these different angles and trying to show how things work. Did you guys notice what's right here? Some people don't notice that there's a X-Wing fighter just sitting right down there in the water. Hidden. So, when I look at this, what do you guys think about this? It still reads very well, right? Still has a recipe of large, medium, and small. One of the things that changed a little bit is all the detail. So the one thing, if I go back to that interview where Doug Chang was talking about that recipe with Ralph McQuarrie, remember the part where they talked about high bands and low bands of detail? To me, that changed a little bit in this, where some of the detail left a little bit. There's detail everywhere, but they actually do a pretty good job of breaking it. You have high detail here, you have a larger area here, you have high detail here, then it fades off. So you do have some areas of broken, it's not constant detail, so they're still breaking it, but I just noticed a little bit of a change. Now, this is, a lot has changed in terms of the feeling of the atmosphere and the feeling that's taking place in here with the light and the angle of the light. It's beautiful work, though. I was trying to see if, I believe Seth Engstrom lives in L.A. Pretty sure he does still. I would love to just try to find him and be like, dude, can you come to the school? Talk about some of your work. It's beautiful. I actually like this because I think adding the realistic detail into the work, it makes it a little bit more busy, but it's filling the need for the concept art to become cinematic shots for the movie, which to me is huge, because that is something that used to only happen in the storyboarding process, and now it's happening inside the concept art process, where you're actually making stills of work that are going to be used exactly inside the movie. They're going to set up the scenes with everything. Okay? But I remember a friend of mine looking at some of this, and we were talking about, he thought that maybe they went a little too overboard with some of the realistic detail in there and the photo bashing. I mean, I can see that being an argument, but still was nicely done. I mean, it makes me wonder if they went to the location first and found the location, took pictures of it, and gave it to the artist. And then they had like hundreds and hundreds of pictures. And then they said, let's now stage it, with fog and everything and get the mood in there and have the characters in there. That could have happened, or they could have actually gone into some of that. Because it's pretty hard to build some of this location around. And I know there was a couple spots where they filmed this on location, but then I know some of it was also green screen too. So it's probably a combination of both. But just look at still the use of large, medium, and small. It's still happening in there. It's nice angled compositions. Not everything has to be flat. It's beautiful. That was a great shot. Do you remember that? There are a lot of great shots from this picture, but that, I remember sitting in the theater and watching this full screen, and I was like, oh, something bad's going to happen. Somebody's in trouble, right? Look at that one-point shot. There's so much power there happening. So what would be cool is you could actually take all this concept art that was done and you could lay it out, because it's also the color script of the film too, which is another thing that's changed, that's influenced part of the design and process. All these were frame by frame, by the way, of what actually happened in the movie. Look at the large right here. Look at how this is this big split down the middle of separating them, you know what I mean? So it's a great compositional way. I mean, look at here, you have good versus evil, and then you have this large collection of shape. You can even look at it as the environment, and then medium would be the props, the walkers, and then over here you have, the small. It's just so nicely done. It's really nice, thought out, simplified compositions. Even down to that at the end there. Large, medium, and small, another great reads. Okay, so how many people have been watching watch The Mandalorian? It's nicely done. It's done by our buddy from Swingers, from the old movie, Jon Favreau, who also directed a lot of the Iron Man movies, right? And a lot of the same concepts are happening here in terms of large, medium, and small. The one thing I noticed that they're doing, which I thought was pretty cool, you've been watching this, they're treating it like a Western. It's basically like a Clint Eastwood story happening where you have this mean, super duper bad guy, and then we're going to slowly, through character development, show and talk a little bit about his weaker side. And obviously his weaker side is going to be for the protection of somebody completely innocent who's Baby Yoda, right? You also have some cool powers. Another cool thing that I noticed that they're doing, that you have to be a fan of the old spaghetti westerns, okay? And some of you are like, what are spaghetti westerns? Those were actually movies done with Clint Eastwood where they were filmed in Italy. And you're like, what? Why were they filmed in Italy? Well, they filmed them in Italy because if you were to spin a globe and if you were to look, they have a lot of the same weather conditions that we have here in Arizona and California. And if you go along, they have a lot of desert areas as well. And it was cheaper to film. So it costs a lot more money with the film unions and so on to keep productions here. So the spaghetti westerns were sort of born. One thing that happened, I don't know if it was on purpose or whatever, but they had this sort of stylized illumination on part of the screen that made the film look like it was a little older or weathered, And I noticed as soon as I saw this, the artist basically would do a painting and he would come back on top of it with either a series of overlays or a filter in Photoshop to sort of unite the whole piece. And actually, that's something that's been done for quite a long time. There are quite a few Photoshop artists that will actually paint a scene that'll be done in, let's say, just normal local color with a little bit of light. Then what they do is they take one layer of like you have a picture of sand, okay, on a layer, and then you transform that layer into an overlay, drop the opacity, and you blend it on top. And that's what this artist has been doing to create this sort of craquelure effect that's taking place. It's not just in one part of all the concept art, it's on all of it. So it's their way of sort of unifying, but again, we're right back to large, medium, small. It's going right into the same context. Why would this be important? Disney's having a tremendous amount of success right now with this. They're continue to have success with it. So I was hoping The Mandalorian would do really well because that means they're going to keep making more stories. Now, unfortunately, in the more story process, they might make some that are really bad, or they might decide to do something that we don't want to know about, But, it's going to continue. But it's really cool to get to look at the concept art that's coming out that's supporting this because, again, we're back to the same recipe. We're back to large, medium, small. That's happening compositionally. It's happening in terms of the narrative layout as well. We're also back to really thinking about and planning our angles because the concept art is going right in to support angles inside the movie in terms of the cinematic layout and structure, which is really important. And what's really cool, I sort of like this technique where it's being painted and there's local color, but there's also a little bit of photo bash in there. And then the artist is going over it with a sort of a crackled little layer with some sand and other items. And it creates this nice type of effect that sort of unifies the work together. What I'm not happy with is why they didn't give the artist credit. And it might be because there might be multiple artists working in one art department for Lucas supervising this. But I would at least like to know who the artists are.
I believe Jon Favreau on his Instagram is posting the concept art and then crediting the artist.
Is he good?
But it's like you have to hunt for it.
Yeah, exactly. And it sort of bothers me that it is an artist. It bugs me because this is something that corporate America has done over time where they start yanking away titles from the artists. And as a concept artist, this is how you make your money and get your name out there, right? So I sort of don't like that they're doing that. But I could see, Disney's all about money at the end of the day. And, but again, and they have a huge, does anyone know what they paid for the Star Wars rights when they bought it from Lucas?
Billions.
Yeah. But they had a bigger goal. Their goal was to adapt, and I actually had a great conversation about this weekend because one of the swim dads is an entertainment lawyer, and we were talking about this. And part of that conversation is how about 75% of the viewing public of the United States is now watching Amazon Prime, Netflix, and going onto what you would call easy access websites, and they're branching away from TV. So if you haven't been paying attention, the normal cable companies are suffering. Spectrum, DirecTV, they're really starting to suffer. They're lacking in content. They're lacking in movies. And we were having this great discussion, and then Brock, who's an entertainment lawyer, that's just his name, he brought up a really good point. Does anyone know why companies are moving into this direction? Part of it is technology. It's ease of access. The fact that a lot of you guys have phones, smartphones and tablets that you can watch movies on. But there's another reason. Because of all of the stupid censorship that's been happening. So if Netflix makes a movie, anyone been watching The Irishman on Netflix? Should be. Okay, good old classic story about Jimmy Hoffa, and it has it has Joe Pesci in it. It has Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Joe Mantegna, has a bunch of famous actors in it. Great software where they're showing them being young and changing the way that they look. There's no more censorship, so this is changing a lot of things where people, as a country that has freedom of speech, we sure have a whole lot of censorship that happens. And so even a lot of things have happened with our current presidential candidate and their party and their views on censorship too, because as you know, a lot of things have been taken away, a lot of rights have been taken away. Like, for example, I heard part of this discussion from Brock, Craigslist used to be a dating app. Now that's all gone. You can't do a lot of that stuff anymore. And part of that comes from that censorship. So movies have been heavily impacted. So it's in the best interest of these companies to start creating their websites and to go to what's called subscription. And a lot of you as students have been affected by subscription, right? Because look at the cost of Photoshop. So you have corporate America and a lot of things changing where they're going over into this. The good news to that is it means more art jobs for us. This is the artists. Because if we could simplify part of our drawing, our design, and we can work on really simple color and local color schemes. Look, there's not a lot of rendering in this. Do you see that? There's really not. There's just the characters have local color on them, and then there's a little bit of light bouncing off. That's it. It's sort of simplified. The compositions simplify, the narrative layout. It's just all about large, medium, small, quick visual reads. That's it. It doesn't need to be anything more complex than that. The rest of it is really just digital paint techniques. It's you sitting down and just painting and going through some of those processes. And those processes of digital painting, they involved everything from simple block out with line, without line. They're you using custom shapes. They're you using photo blend textures. I mean, that's really how things have really started to change. But what I really wanted to push with part of this texture, is I wanted you guys to understand how as young artists, all you have to do, could you imagine if you had 20 images that were similar to like this of the Mandalorian right now inside your portfolio? Someone's going to grab that. Hollywood has a tendency to copy. So people are going to see this, and they're going to start copying and using this inside productions for DreamWorks, inside productions from other companies. Other film companies are going to want to do this. Okay? So you have this ability to go in here. I mean, look at this piece right here. Look at how easy the composition is. It's an angular composition split down the middle. It's an upshot. Upshots mean usually we're implying some type of power. So whoever is on the higher ground tends to have the power. In this case, it's the Jawas. There's a huge angle going right down the middle of the composition, which means something's happening and it's not positive and somebody's going to get hurt. Okay? These guys are just silhouette reads, basically. There's no rendering on them. There's no real sky in the background. There's a little bit of image detail right here that's broken up. And then you have the Mandalorian who's getting shocked. That's it. Somewhat simplified, right? So if you could start creating some of your own work like this and think of a little story. Now, one of the things that I was going to mention, I was going to allow you guys, if you wanted to go into this direction and start working on some of your own ideas, go for it. But we need to sit down and I need to write out a bunch of ideas. So what I thought I would do is when I'm done here, I will post all this work up on a blog for you. And then you can go in there and you can copy particular scenes or look at the way they're laying it out, look at the arrangement of shape, and then stage it with your own characters. In fact, if you wanted to, you could take everything. There's nothing wrong with copying or mimicking. You could take anything from here in terms of the narrative layout and the compositional layout and apply it right into animation, right? You could do it with your own characters if you have them. So this is a workshop where you have that complete freedom to get in there and have fun. By the way, this is one of the only pieces, Jackie, that I saw that had the name of the artist on it.
Yeah.
That's it. I'm like, really? That's all? You're not going to give me all the other pieces? I want to see more of it. But again, large, medium, small, taking place, simple reads, you know, nice blends. That's a great piece right there, too. Pretty cool. What do you guys think? Right? It's awesome. Get this. And it was a little hard to find these high res, too. I had to really hunt. I had to call a buddy of mine and go, dude, where can I find high res images of the Mandalorian? I was almost going to start screen grabbing him off of, the show, but then I was able to. I couldn't find any of the later episodes, though. That's all under lock and key right now. But at least I got my hands on these. I mean, that's huge, because this thing is just out now. Usually artwork like this isn't released like that. But really great scenes. Isn't that a wonderful painting right there? Look at the large, medium, and small, the shape arrangements. Look at Yoda's little finger reaching up to touch his. It's great. I have students that could do that painting right there. I have a lot of students that could pull that off. There's not a lot happening in that painting. It's a one-point perspective shot. There's some clouds in the back with light coming through. There's not a lot of rendering done on the character. The character is very simple. He has a little bit of a nice reflective light shot there. That's it. Light's coming through. It's hitting the ground, and it's going in its normal progression, which would be, it's closer to the light source. It's going to be nice and warm. When it hits the ground, it delineates as it goes cooler and comes towards. So there's a shift between the warm and cool. That's it. That's beautiful, isn't it? Look at the shape arrangements. Again, you have, when you take it the large, you know, the large would be part of the whole back environment. This shape here and this in the foreground are like your medium, and then your small is a Mandalorian standing in the doorway. Any of you in this classroom could take this image right here and put an animated character and change part of the location and pretty much copy it, and you would look like compositional geniuses in your portfolio. You would. There's no reason why you couldn't do that. I mean, that's a beautiful shot. All right? So as we wrap this up here, we have one more image, and we're done. So there, you've seen 121 images of Star Wars, and I knew it would take an hour to go through all of this. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give me a minute. I have all these images in folders. Do you want me to post this on the blog site? Yes. Then you can look at it as you'd like. You can download them, put them in a file. In fact, if you want, I can render out part of this demo, and I could give you all the images. Do you want the images on your thumb drive in a folder? I can just do that too. I can do both things. Okay? So what I'd like to do is, let me just add this on here, is for an assignment, those of you that were in the narrative class that want to keep painting digitally or go into something like this, I'd like you to go through and pick 3 or 4 scenes. Okay, so before I do that, let me come all the way back here. Let me go real quick and go all the way back to the very beginning. Because I started to outlay in this lecture a couple of the scenes that you're going to notice that are being used. Okay, right here. So you're going to have, you can think of a chase scene, you can think of a fight scene. Okay, so I have some students in here that had prop design class. They already designed a whole bunch of awesome props. So you could stage those props in an environment with a character in it, put that in a portfolio, or if you wanted to, you could even do your own version of Star Wars art. Who wants to do their own version of Star Wars art? Yes, I give you full granting permission to do that as well. You know, I want you to be encouraged by this. And if you want, heck, if I was you, I would start working on some stuff for like Mandalorian. Start thinking, in fact, if you want to take a character that exists, that's easy to draw, that we have reference to, take the Mandalorian and think about staging the Mandalorian in different scenes. For example, what happens if we have the Mandalorian walking up with Baby Yoda in that floating pod and they encounter 3 animals in the desert? How would you stage that, large, medium, and small? What about if he's in his interior of a ship and he's flying with Yoda and they're flying through an asteroid belt being chased by other ships? How would you illustrate that? So write out, I can do this all day long and come up with all these different ideas. That would be my recommendation to you, is start coming up with some really simple ideas, and then let's take them into thumbnails. And if you like, next week when you guys come into class, we can put thumbnails up on the board if you like. You're not required to, since there's no grade in this class. And I'm more than happy to take a look at your little linear thumbnails. Or if you want to, I have a couple students in here that I know are going to go right into tonal massing, and they're going to go into black and white and just start massing tones on top of each other very simply too. You can do that. But as you're doing that, go back to these the main scenes and go back to this. Remember, foreground, midground, background, simple reads, and it's always the same. It's always whatever's closer to you is a little bit darker, whatever recedes away from you is lighter. That's the other thing I didn't put up here, is the atmospheric perspective never changes. It's always the same. They don't reverse it. They always keep it similar. The only time they reversed it was when they were showing a couple of the swamp scenes where you're inside that heavy swamp and forest, where if things were to recede away from you, they'd actually get darker because you're not by the light source. That would make sense. But that's really one of the only times that it changes. Okay? All right, cool. Have fun, guys.